Hello, friends. Welcome aboard the Round Trip Stories podcast, where we share stories of moving around the world and back again, reflecting on the lessons we've learned along the way. My name is Melissa.
And my name is Tracy, and we are so glad you're joining us for today's episode. Welcome back to part 2 of our interview with Jonny Chin, science teacher from San Francisco and Chinese-American third culture kid who grew up in Beijing, China for his K-12 school career. He repatriated to California to attend university and began the process of reflecting on his third culture kid identity in college and beyond. Jonny shares tips on how to reflect and even give back to others going through tough transitions. So buckle your seatbelts and make sure your tray tables and seats are in their upright positions as part 2 of Jonny's round trip story gets ready for takeoff. Okay, we are back for part 2 of our interview with Jonny Chin, and he is a third culture kid, originally from San Francisco, but grew up a lot of his growing up years in Beijing, China. So welcome back, Jonny. We're so thankful to have spent a good chunk of time with you before, and we get to hear your part 2 right now.
Excited.
So remind us where you lived abroad and how long you were there.
So I grew up in China, Beijing, China, from K to 12. I was there for 12 and a half years. And then I actually went abroad again post-college for about 8 months to a country called Kyrgyzstan. So I kind of had 2 repatriations that are a little bit different, but also have some similarities.
And then tell us about what you're doing these days.
I am a high school science teacher at a school that my church started called Rise University Preparatory in the Bayview neighborhood of San Francisco. I've been teaching for 6 years, and I love teaching high school science. I think it's the best job in the world. And yeah, I'm enjoying it.
So, Jonny, you spent your growing up years in Beijing, China, but you're not a Chinese national. You're an American national.
I'm a Chinese-American adult now.
Mm-hmm. All right. So in this episode, we're talking about your return to the U.S. So tell us why you ended up leaving Beijing and where you went after that.
Yeah. So I graduated from high school in Beijing and left for university. And I went to Los Angeles, where I attended UCLA. And so I spent some time there doing that at the best school in the world. Go Bruins.
We are so interested to hear about your repatriation process. So what it was like moving back to the U.S. as a college student and as a TCK after your 12 and a half years in China, in Beijing. But first, tell us a story about your initial transition to being back in California when you first left China.
Part of the reason why I chose California was because it is, obviously a place I was familiar with. And I remember choosing my school in some ways based off of like diversity. And I knew that usually being a bigger school would have a lot of people from all over the world, but also even in the U.S., just a lot of different experiences. And that's something that I desired coming from an international school. I'll say one thing that was unique compared to some of my peers who went to maybe like Christian colleges was there's not like this like designated TCK group.
Right.
And I kind of found myself once again in between because I had American friends and I also had international student friends that were not TCKs. And it was kind of difficult finding people that were TCKs. It actually wasn't until like 2 years later where I met my first like TCK friend in college. And so I think the difficult thing was I was processing my TCK story without any structure. And that was probably the most difficult part for me. I think making friends obviously was difficult in terms of like the normal introductions, like, oh, where you're from? And I was like, well, let me tell you, I'm from China. And they'd be like, but you don't sound Chinese. And this is so good. I feel like it's a common thing amongst a lot of TCKs. But I think for me, finding a community where I felt kind of like at home was initially difficult. And it actually wasn't until the end of my first year where I was a part of an international student group that was basically, one of the missions was to help international students adjust to life in
Mhm.
America. And actually, I found kind of a home there. And that was actually a great outlet for me because I could experience some of the similar things about international life by connecting with people from India and
Mhm.
South Korea and Japan. But also, like, we were in the US. And so I think my experience abroad, being abroad, also served as a way to help them, but also my own
Mhm.
story about repatriating and transitioning to, oh my gosh, there's so many choices at the grocery store, or oh my gosh, like drivers wait for you, like that's weird.
They don't run you over?
I think all of those things, from the big things to the small things, because I was kind of an in between, I could help with that. And that actually served as,
Yeah.
I think the helpful thing is that everyone else in college has a fresh start. And so I
Yeah.
think that's different than, let's say, if I was a TCK repatriating during my high school years, where I'm going along with peers that already have set friend groups. And so, and actually, in some ways, my experience going to college was, um, it was difficult because it was, I was trying to make a new home, but building community was easier, if that makes sense. And I think because community was being built, that made finding belonging and the sense of home, that made it easier. And I think I was also hopeful
Yeah.
that, like, UCLA is a school that has all school pride, and so that obviously helped. But I'm grateful
Yeah.
that the ways in which the school is set up made it such that I was able to build community, and kind of was on a more level playing field as some of my peers. Obviously, it was more difficult because I'm the one that's transitioning cultures, but everyone else is there for a fresh start, and so was I.
Is there anything else that you want to share about what was hard?
Yeah. The unique thing I think about my goodbyes, well, I don't want to say unique because I'm sure other people have gone through this, but I kind of had to say goodbye to China twice. The first was when I
Mm.
moved to college. And so I had to say goodbye to it as home because um, it was, I was no longer living there, right? My friends were no longer there. But similar to my story from my time growing up in China, I would actually go back to China in college every year. And so it was kind of like the same thing of, oh, I'm going back home. Um,
Mhm.
but my second goodbye was when my family moved before my senior year of college in 2015. And so I think the hard thing was kind of going through it again.
Yeah.
But that one felt more permanent.
Sure.
And I think that was difficult because I don't think I had known grief like that up until that point. And I think, research shows now that, like, leaving home as home it can almost feel like you're losing a family member, or like a beloved
Sure.
pet, right? And no one else I knew was going through that. And I think that was what made it hard. Where I had friends, obviously my friends at that point were like really good friends, some of my best friends at that point, still some of my best friends. But it was like, hey, like we're grieving with you, but we don't know what it's like. And
Yeah.
so it was something that I had to go through alone. And that's a part of my story where I feel like that was where I got to experience God and seeing God as home.
Mhm.
And really looking forward to like Revelation 21, 22. Um, but that was, I think, one of the more challenging things for me, where it's like, wow, like, why do I feel so sad? Almost like I'm losing a family member, even though it's like just a place, right? Or
Mm.
like I could always
Yeah.
visit, right? But I think it was something that I really felt for really like my first quarter. I like cried every week.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's kind of what my kids experienced when we left China permanently. One of my sons is pretty sensitive, and yeah, like every day crying, tears every day for like, I don't know, 6 weeks at least, because that home was torn away from him. And he didn't know any other home besides China.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. So were you able to be there when your parents were also saying goodbye? And was your sister already in college by then, or?
So she said goodbye around the same time I did, because we left for college, and that was like September, but my parents early September, but my parents left China uh end of October.
Okay. But at that point, when you left that time, you already knew that they were leaving
Yeah.
And yeah, it is a huge loss. And the more you love a place and the people there, the bigger you feel the loss of that. And you can know that it's going to be okay, but that does not take away from the
Yeah.
sadness and the loss and the grief of it.
And I was going back to a situation where it's like, it's college, right? College is a temporary thing. I was going to my senior year, right? So I was grieving that. And then like 6 months later, I had to grieve leaving college and saying goodbye to those friends again. And so it was kind of this like compounded grief.
For
I will
sure.
say I'm grateful that like my friends were such good friends and they never like belittled my grief and were always there. And
Yeah.
they made me feel like, oh, like, yeah, tell me more about this. And like, I actually had friends who visited China with me. And so that also helped.
Oh,
Not
yeah.
Beijing, but it was like a separate part of China. But like, it was still
Still.
cool to like have that, right? Like they knew the culture I was leaving and the food.
Yeah. Had gotten to experience a little taste of part of your world over there.
Yeah.
So tell us a story or some observations about some specific things that were helpful then or have helped since then.
Yeah. Um, for me, I actually went to a reentry seminar, which is it was with I think a Christian organization called Barnabas International.
Okay.
They did this like 2 week reentry seminar for kids, specifically I think missionary kids around the
Yeah.
world. Um, and that was actually one of the first times I heard that I was like kind of like a TCK, but I think hearing about grief, and I remember there was this one day where we just put sticky notes on all the things that we were losing.
Yeah.
And I think anyone can do that, right? But I think just taking space and making space for, hey, like, what are the things that you miss, right?
Mhm.
I'm a big writer, and so I like journal a lot. I'm a big list person, and so I would often be like if I would feel this wave of grief, I'd be like, hey, like, what do I miss right now? One of the helpful prompts I remember hearing from a mentor of mine, shout out Tanya Crossman.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Yeah, she's a former youth leader of mine.
Yeah.
We interviewed her.
We loved her interview. She was
Oh,
amazing.
that's
Yes.
great.
So yes, people look for our interview with
Yeah.
Tanya Crossman because she was amazing.
One of the journaling prompts that she inspired me to do was every night for the I think first like 40 days I would write a thing that I missed about China and my old life and something that I appreciated about my new life. And that really helped me as someone who processed by writing.
Yeah.
Um, and so that was really great. Um, but I think another thing is just surrounding yourself with people who just love you for you and support you and safe spaces to talk about it. And even though they might not understand my experience, they know what loss is, right? Every person on the
Mhm.
planet has experienced some kind of loss. And so finding people that you're able to be vulnerable with is really great. So one of the things that's helpful is actually a TED talk that I really like. I don't remember the title. I can go back and look it up. But it's the idea of how home is no longer just a single place. And the speaker, I think she's African, but she grew up in like she had spent some time in like the UK or whatever. She says a home is made up not just of places, but also of rituals. And that was really helpful for me to
Mm.
carry over. It's like, hey, like even if I can't, I'm not in China, right? I'm not in Beijing. What are practices from China that were part of my old life that I still can bring in, right? And so for
Yeah.
me, like I remember one of the things I loved about being in China was like going on walks around my neighborhood. And so like for me, a tradition I brought over into college, like I would love to go on walks during the evening time, to just like
Yeah.
think, or even like eating at like a Chinese restaurant, or I don't know, like what are traditions that you can bring from your old life that you can carry over
Mhm.
into your new life that will still make it feel like home. It may not feel
Mhm.
like China home, but will make you feel like home. And so even I think about my second repatriation from Kyrgyzstan. I never used to really drink tea in the morning, and something I brought back was like just drinking tea in the morning. And that was like one of the first things I do. I brew my tea and I just sit and I read
Yeah.
and I pray, and that's how I start my day. And that's a tradition I brought from my time there.
That's great, and it's so true. Those rituals can be so meaningful and grounding for us. And yeah, it's good, I think, for us to realize how there are ways that we can transfer those routines and habits and things from one place to another, even if it at one point was connected to a particular place. There are ways we can recreate those same type of experiences in other places, and that can be so helpful for us.
Definitely.
So, my last question for you before Tracy finishes up with our final questions is sort of what we like to think of as a choose your own adventure question. So, you get to pick which of these questions you want to answer. So, the first one is, how often do you think now about having been a TCK, and how much would you say that it affects your life now? Or what are some favorite experiences you've had in your life of connecting with other TCKs? Or do you have a favorite funny story about your time living abroad or your transition back that you want to share? So, which one of those questions do you want to answer?
Yeah. Um, they're all such great questions. I'm gonna share about connecting with other third culture kids.
Okay,
Um,
great.
I know for me it was a point that was very much lacking during my time at UCLA. But I remember when I met, I think the first one, TCK friend I met in college, it was just like a fire hose of just like, oh my gosh, connecting with that. And so I will say, I think because we're living in an increasing globalized world, you are able to meet TCKs probably more than before. Um,
Mhm.
but I also loved the reentry seminar, and I actually ended up the reentry seminar that I was a part of. I ended up staffing it,
That's great.
and that was
Nice.
really cool to kind of have a full circle moment. To this day, it's still one of the best things I've ever done in my life to be able to be there
Yeah.
for kids just fresh out of it. And I just have this memory of watching the end of the Lord of the Rings: Return of the King when like Frodo says goodbye to his fellow hobbits. I
Oh,
still
yeah.
almost always cry at that scene to this
I
day.
know what you're talking
Mhm.
Um,
about.
Mhm.
exactly. And I remember watching this as a group together on like maybe our like last day, and these
Oh,
young men that I was like mentoring, and we just like cried together. And
yeah.
I just knew in my mind like, hey, like the TCK journey is one of continual grief, but it's also one of continual joy, and it's
Yeah.
okay in that moment to cry together. Um,
Yeah.
so many stories from that summer seminar because it does feel like a summer camp, but I think it's just incredible how deep TCKs can go so quickly. It's also really meaningful for me as a TCK to go through the camp again as a mentor, not because I
Mhm.
necessarily found or figured out everything, but because I had settled more into my TCK identity throughout my time in college. And so that was actually
Mhm.
really healing and really encouraging for me to experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're so happy that you took the seminar and then you went and you mentored too, because gosh, how valuable that would be. And Johnny, we were thinking about naming our podcast There and Back Again, but then we realized that, oh, that's like copyrighted in the Lord
Yeah.
of the Rings. So
It's a good name. I
it's a
don't
good
blame you.
name. We're there and back again. And then there and then back again. And then there and back again. Wherever we go. Okay, Johnny, tell us a final story about how your time abroad continues to add value to your life now.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things for me, and I would say a lot of people in general would say, is the relationships, both my time abroad, um, K to 12, my time in China, as well as my 8 months in Kyrgyzstan. Like, they're still really close friends of mine that I have from both seasons and past lives of mine. Um, I think I love, and I was actually messaging with a friend who visited recently, but it still amazes both of us how years can go by and how quick we want to still see each other and are like eager to. I think there are times when, you hear like, oh, someone is in town and it can feel awkward. But for me personally, I love that I feel like I can go to a place, be like, hey, I feel like this person is in this city and like hit them up. One of my best friends from high school, he's in Taiwan, and he was visiting the US last year. And I hadn't seen him in 4 years, but he wasn't going to come to the Bay Area, but instead he was going to go to LA. And so last summer, I decided to drive all the way down just to see him. And we hung out. We went to like Griffith Observatory, went to a WNBA game, got some good food, and met up with other friends from my same high school friend group that were in LA, and we all like got food together and hung
Oh,
out.
that is so special.
And I love that because I think for me, relationships have become one of the things I value most in my life. Um, Not just the way in which I view them and value them, but also the way in which I want to maintain them and see them evolve as we become adults and be able to share like how we've grown since then and what our reflections on our time together from that season of our lives. And for me, the
Yeah.
relationships are always the thing that I value the most.
Mhm.
Johnny, I'm so glad you just said about you are looking back on that time in your life too. And
Mhm.
so the reflection piece is really important. And now you can look back, with 2020 vision and discuss like, oh, what about this? What's your take on this? And how have you grown in this way? But processing it together can help us to deepen our understanding of that particular
Yeah,
time in our lives.
absolutely. I think of it as not just like 2020 vision, but almost like an ever increasing like rear view mirror. Because the way in which I look
Hmm.
back at my time in China when I was in college is different than how I look back at it now.
Hmm.
I
Mhm.
think when I look back at my
Yeah.
time in China when I was in college is very much like, oh my gosh, this is how much of home I miss, is what I love, the people. And then now that I'm 30 and I've actually spent more time in the States than in China, which is weird. Like I see it
Mhm.
differently.
Yeah.
I see it as, kind of like going back to that analogy of past lives. It feels more like that. But I also see the ways in which it enriches my life more now as like a bigger picture of like who I am and how I see the world and my love for seeing other cultures and maybe traveling. And I think I have a greater a bent towards be able to see the devil's advocate more than I did before, all those things.
Mhm.
Um, and so I think as an adult, you grow and you obviously learn more about the world. You learn about adulting, right? But then also like you realize how much your childhood affects your adulting and the ways in which you do those things.
And I think that's part of well, I know that that's part of growing up no matter what our experiences are. We reflect as we get older and we just keep reflecting. And I think our lives just have the potential to grow, like you said, not just broader, but deeper. And, we can look back and see where God was at work
Mhm.
in different things that maybe we had no idea of in the moment or in the season. And yeah, it's always good to look back.
Yeah, it's like a movie you rewatch, right? Like the first time you experience it for the
Yes.
first time. And I think when I
Yeah.
was younger, like when I was in college, I would reflect on my time in China in terms of like events. And then now when I reflect on it, like even preparing for this podcast, I don't just see it in terms of events. I see it in terms of like threads and themes.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and I think that's the beauty of not just a third culture, but any point in your life, right? You can reflect back and be like, wow, like how did that past life, how did that season of my
Mhm.
story influence where I am now?
All right, Johnny, what last word of encouragement or advice can you give to our listeners?
Yeah, I think about maybe people who maybe still like the reentry is still fresh. I'm thinking about maybe some of our younger viewers, but
Mhm.
for me, grief is something that I've actually become really passionate about like the past like 10 years of my life. And I think what really started me on that journey was leaving China and seeing grief as not an enemy, but actually as a
Yeah.
companion. And that even though the feelings of it feel really painful, it is a companion that is one to actually grow you and stretch you. And
Yeah.
my encouragement is to make space for the grieving. And that grief is able to coexist actually very well with joy. I
Yeah.
think Inside Out is a great movie to kind of incorporates that, right?
Mhm.
And it takes place in San Francisco.
Exactly. But I also think that the capacity with which you're able to grieve will also be the capacity with which you're able to experience joy. And that the deeper
Absolutely.
you're able to experience the grief will also be the deeper you're able to experience the joy, both as you look back and have those moments of nostalgia, but also when you're in your new home. I think there are
Mhm.
times when you grieve, especially something as big as the loss of home, that it can feel like this vacuum and it can feel like you're falling. And the fear is like, if I keep grieving, like, will I ever be able to stop? Right. Um, when I think in reality, it actually deepens you as a person. And yeah, I could go on about it, but I think, it's very much in line with what Paul states in Corinthians about, sorrowful yet always rejoicing. And I
Mhm.
think as an adult, I've grown to learn that these things that seem like opposites are actually in reality just in parts of the puzzle piece, and that it
Yeah.
rounds you as a person and also ends up rounding it as an experience.
Mhm.
Um, doesn't mean that you can grieve over things that are hard, and you can also grieve over things that are good. Just like you can
Yeah.
celebrate things that are painful in the moment that you look back on like, wow, I'm actually really proud that I went through that as a growing point, right? You can rejoice over that. Even though in a moment you
Yeah.
might have been crying, right? Like kind of like the stories that you laugh about 10 years later are like moments of like some of your most embarrassing moments or some like the hardest things you went through, right? But now you can laugh about it.
Jonny, thank you. Yeah, thank you for mentioning all that process. And also, when we're on the other side, when we're have gone through the grief period, it's always important for us to go and help other people go through it, right? Like you did when you went and served at that retreat, to that transition retreat, and even your words encourage people, right, who are
Mhm.
maybe this transition time is raw for them, or they're wanting to celebrate and have the joy now of their reflecting on their hard transition time.
Yeah.
I will say one of the ways in which my TCK background has been a gift to me is I had to learn to transition at a relatively early stage of my life.
Mhm.
But transition is just a part of life, right? Whether you become a parent, whether you lose a family member, whether you move, whether you change jobs. And so I think the lessons I learned transitioning as a third culture kid and ways in which I learned to grieve and ways I learned to rebuild my life and to grow new friendships and to grow a new sense of home. These are all things that apply to other parts of my life and will apply to
Yeah.
other parts of everyone's lives.
Right.
And I actually found myself being an asset for when some of my domestic friends who maybe have not moved before, but are like, hey, I actually never really grieved the loss of my father. I never grieved, being jobless. And I actually found myself in those moments being an asset where it's like, okay, maybe I haven't lost my father, or I haven't, you know, lost my job before, but I know what it's like to have something ripped away from you. I know what it's
Yeah.
like when you feel guilty for, it's like, why do I feel guilty for missing this? Right. When it's, I did this,
Mhm.
right.
Mhm.
And actually it's been a cool sub ministry to do with friends.
That's neat. Yep, it makes me think of in one of the Corinthians where Paul talks about, we're able to comfort others with the comfort that we have received.
Yes.
And it's so true. We don't have to have gone through exactly the same thing to be able to recognize and have empathy for others that are
Yeah.
going through difficult things. And I
Those
think
threads,
that
right? Those
Mhm.
threads that span
Yeah.
different lives that you've lived.
Yeah. Yep.
All right, Jonny. Well, that concludes our interview, and we're so thankful for you sharing your threads with us.
So
Yeah.
honored to have shared.
Thank you so much. We look forward to being able to share your stories and your wisdom with our listeners, and we know that they are going to be encouraged.
Thanks, Jonny.
As we land this interview, we hope that you have been inspired by Jonny's stories. Although processing his TCK repatriation without structure in university was challenging, he had a good start with his pre-entry seminar, reflective writing, and developing deep relationships with international and local college students. He encourages others to reflect on their past lives and see the threads which form themes and can give us insight and connections in our lives today. He says to not be afraid to take the time to grieve what is left behind so that we can experience the full joy of all that we have been given, especially in our precious relationships. No matter what leg of the journey you're on, friends, we are so grateful you have brought us along with you.
Come back next time to hear from our next TCK guest, Amy Burton, a life and mindset coach who grew up as a third culture kid in Spain. Amy now lives in Alaska and is a mother of 3.
If you're enjoying our podcast, we'd love it if you would leave us a review in your podcast app. And don't forget, you can visit roundtripstories.com to see photos of our guests and to join our email list. And of course, tell your friends to travel the world with us. No passport, no packing, and no goodbyes required. Thanks so much for listening, friends. We'll see you next time.
Yeah, so I graduated from high school in Beijing and left for university. And I went to Los Angeles, where I attended UCLA. And so I spent some time there doing that at the best school in the world. Go Bruins.
Go Trojans. Gosh. All right.
But you're a San Francisco Giants fan, not an LA Dodgers fan.
I root against all LA teams except for UCLA.
Oh, and I always root against UCLA because I went to the enemy school. Okay. All team affiliations aside. Go ahead, Melissa.
All right.